Well, the death of Great Britain's Margaret Thatcher, one of the finest prime minister that the country ever had, some would argue perhaps the finest. We remember the special political relationship and friendship between Margaret Thatcher and President Ronald Reagan. President Reagan famously said that the Lord brought us together for a profound purpose. And on his 83rd birthday, back in 1994, Mrs. Thatcher honored her dear friend's legacy. Take a look at this.
You strode into our midst at a time when America needed you most. This great country had been through a period of national malaise, bereft of any sense of moral direction. Through it all, throughout 8 of the fastest moving years in memory, you were unflappable and unyielding. You are not only America's president, important as that is, you were a great leader. In a time of average men, you stood taller than anyone else.
Tribute. Art Laffer joins me now. He served as President Ronald Reagan's economic advisor and worked with Prime Minister Thatcher, knew her well, dined with her and her husband Dennis at his home in California. Art, good to have you with us this morning.
Thank you, Martha.
Just talk to me. Tell me about your thoughts on her this morning.
Well, you know, she was a very normal person in personal life. She was a girly girl. She was very well grounded. She wasn't some weird person. You know, they all talk about her as being set in her ways and intransigent and dictatorial. That's not true. If you presented a good argument to Lady Thatcher when she was prime minister or otherwise, she would listen to it and evaluate it, consider it, and in many cases change her mind on subjects. I mean, the first tax cut she did with Jeffrey Howe, which she cut taxes where they've never been paid and raised taxes where they can't be avoided. That was in 79-80. That one didn't work out well. But then when Nigel Lawson became Chancellor of the Exchequer, she dropped the highest tax rate to 40% with no offsets. And you got the boom in Britain of incredible proportions. And, you know, as just a person, Tony Blair, for example, thought she was the best prime minister ever. I checked with my friend Arnab Banerjee, who was his chief economist, and I was having dinner with her over in Chester Square, which is where she lived and officed. And I told her, I said, before we have dinner, I've got to tell you that Tony Blair, Prime Minister Blair, thinks you're the best prime minister the UK has ever had. And she sort of giggled and she says, "Ooh, well, I quite like him too." I mean, she transcended party labels. She was phenomenal. If you talk about Reagan being taller than any man ever, Margaret Thatcher was taller than any lady ever. She was as great for Britain as Reagan was for the United States. I'll miss her terribly.
You know, in many ways, she made it look easy to be as strong and have such, you know, sort of very strong convictions as she did. It was not easy, and there was a ton of backlash to what she was doing in terms of, you know, cutting entitlements and union busting in Great Britain. I mean, she went up against people who were so entrenched, and she was fearless in that regard, Art.
Yeah, but internally it was easy. I mean, good logic. You know, you can only get one answer when you add up a column of numbers. There's no compromise on that answer. It's right or it's not right. And people don't work to pay taxes. They work to get paid after tax. And, you know, dealing with all these people, Sir Keith Joseph, on privatizing rail and coal and iron and all this, she understood the economics. And she wasn't willing to compromise at the expense of the British people. And she did a great job on that. The only time I remember a problem existing between Reagan and Thatcher was on the Falkland Islands, and whether she should go down there and do that. And bottom line, I think she ultimately was correct. I think she did the right thing there in getting Argentina out of the Falkland Islands, but that was a clash between Reagan and Thatcher at that time. But other than that, she just did what she knew was right. Yeah. And sooner or later it paid off, and it paid off gloriously. Martha, she wasn't thrown out of the prime minister's seat by the Liberals. She was thrown out by Labour. She was thrown out of the prime minister's seat by her own party. And she was followed by Major, who quickly turned off the country. And then you got Tony Blair, who was a great prime minister as well. Yeah. It's just an amazing era, and it's so sad.
She talks about, in that clip that we just showed, she talked about Ronald Reagan as being not just a great president, but a great leader. And we talk a lot, Art, about leadership and what that takes. And, you know, I think of people of consequence in history, right? And so many leaders just come and go, really. And, you know, school children years from now won't remember most of them. But she was a leader, a human being who had real consequence in her lifetime.
And a real person. I mean, when you were sitting there with her and talking, she was normal. She didn't have an agenda. She wasn't driven by some beast of her childhood. She was very, very focused on making Britain and the world a far better place. And she knew how to add numbers. She knew how to look at incentives. You know, economics, Martha, is all about incentives. People like doing what they find attractive and are repelled by things they find unattractive. She knew perfectly well that if you tax people who work and pay people who don't work, you're going to get lots of people not working. This isn't a position that's compromisable, and neither she nor Reagan compromised on it, and both of them were correct. And you can see the results in both countries. It's just spectacular what she and Ronald Reagan did and did together. And someday, maybe we'll have time to go through a lot of personal stories I can tell you, because
I would love that, Art.
And
Let's put that on the calendar.
Oh, well, thank you. It was just loads of fun being with them.
We'd love to hear more from you, Art. Thank you so much. We'll do that later. Art Laffer.